combat and fight back with maltracks. The war of the minds, they want control of the masses. And Common Core, they dumb us down in the classes. Without knowledge, we can't gain access. Build with the elders, take notes and write classics. We keep whining on the block, how it's gonna stop? Let's start supporting our own, make their supply drop. We buy stocks, then we buy blocks, cause we know the truth and we tuned in to Dr. Maya.
Baby Fahodie, Baby Tubi, welcome to another Truth to Power Talk with your sister, Dr. Maat. Thank you for joining another powerful discussion. And tonight, I have with me, family, another powerful guest, but she is no stranger to the community, Dr. Tyrene Wright. Doctor, how are you doing tonight?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing tonight, Doctor. I can't complain. I know we're starting a little late. Look, we're starting a little late. And look, my apologies to you and my apologies to the listening audience, because I see they've been in the building. Shout out to New Black World Order, Garrett, a beautiful mind, Marcia Penda, brother Chorus Hollis, and OG Gorilla. So peace to all the family in the building. Family, take a moment out to thumb up this video. Please thumb up this video, family. You know how the YouTube algorithm works. The more you engage with it, the more my shows show up on your feed, right? Along with everyone else's. Also, family, if you're watching this Truth to Power Talk on another platform, be sure to head on over to YouTube, type in Dr. Oya Maat, hit the subscribe button, and then hit the notification bell so that anytime I go live, you will be notified. And family, you don't have to worry about receiving a bunch of alerts from me. Okay, I go live maybe 2 or 3 times out of the week. Also, family, if you miss any of my Truth to Power talks, I've created a Truth to Power Talk playlist with, I'm telling you, with all of the previous interviews I've had on the greats, you know, Dr. Malefe Asante, Dr. Wade Nobles, Dr. William Darity, Dr. Julian, Professor James Small, Dr. Kaba Kamene. Just a few weeks ago, I brought on the sister of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, Mama, I call her Mama Lauren. Mama Lauren came on the platform. And just last week, I had Professor Hunter James on, who is a colleague of Dr. Patricia Newton. And so, family, you already know. If you missed any of the previous discussions, go back into the archives and check them out. Also, family, join me back here on Sundays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Read Book Club. We're reading tomorrow we're reading and discussing the last chapter of the book. It's in my bedroom. The Color of Money by Mercer Baradaran. I probably butchered her name. But we're reading the last chapter of that. It's called The last chapter is entitled The Color of Money Matters. And she begins the chapter with talking about Barack Obama. And then she moves into talking about President Trump. So you don't want to miss the discussion tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So let's get busy, family. Tonight I have with me Dr. Tyrene. Doc, am I calling your name correctly? Is it Dr. Tyrene?
It's Tyrene.
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 Wow. Tyrene Wright with me. And this queen, this beautiful queen is a historian. She's a historian. She is a scholar. She is also an author. She is also a professor and just a beautiful person. When I reached out to her and said, you know, Doc, could you be on my platform? You know, I want to talk to you about, you know, Booker T. Washington. You know, she emailed me back. She said, sure, you know, I'll be there. No problem at all. And actually, family, you already heard her name because Professor James Small was literally on this platform 3 weeks ago, and he encouraged all of us to purchase her book, Booker T. Washington, The Making of a Pan-Africanist. And remember, most of you went to Amazon and you said, Doc, Professor, the book is, you said, out of print. And so Dr. Wright, could you tell them where to purchase your book?
So the book is available on its own website. It's called BookerTWashingtonandAfrica.com. It has been there for a year since the book came out. It was on Amazon, but you're right, it's sold out. And yeah, Amazon is okay, but they tag on a lot of extra fees that make the book, you know, more expensive than I want it to be. Right. So it's Booker T. Washington and Africa. It's all one word .com. And
I'm looking
the
for it right
last
now.
page on that site, you can actually purchase the book. And we have books right now, so do so, because part of the reason why I'm, just sort of doing a lot of interviews and talks on the book is because a revised and expanded version of the book is coming out soon in about another month and a half. And so what's still available is the original version, right? Where I'm talking to the people in the original, exactly. And if you go to the last page to get the book or order the book, you can actually purchase the book. So thank you for doing that. So the book is still available, the original book. Now the expanded and revised version is a little bit, it's going to have the same cases in it, but it's a little bit different, right? I'm expanding the conversation. And maybe if I don't know if you want me to talk about it now, but there was
please talk about it. Please talk about it.
So there was politics behind publishing this book. And I had a regular academic publisher. And then I decided when it was completed that, if I'm going to put into practice what is actually in this book, then I will actually release it independently and not give it away to the academy. Because I'm talking to us. I'm talking to African people. I'm not talking to other academicians in this book. Matter of fact, the preface of the book, for those of you who have it, is sharp criticism about what happened in the academy that relates to Booker T. Washington. Mm-hmm. The academy, academicians, scholars, historians are responsible for why you don't know what we're going to talk about here today with regard to Washington and his role in Africa. Okay.
No, absolutely.
Right. So there's a conscious, deliberate history and, maneuvering to not allow direct interpretation by African people on Washington to be a part of that. Okay, there was a monopoly, in essence, of the legacy and the factual history of Booker T. Washington and Tuskegee. And so why would I, I've talked to the academy enough, actually. And so they're not going to, I redressed whatever they did, right? But I'm talking, this is knowledge, this is information that belongs to us.
Absolutely. No,
Washington belonged to us. So that's why I released it that way. And the book has done exceptionally well. So very well, better than it would have done with an academic press.
And look, my book club, the Read Book Club, we will be, and I said this to you on the phone, and I'll say this to you publicly. Okay. When the new edition drops, when will the new edition drop, by the way?
Not until mid-May.
Mid-May.
So, but this is the book you want to have because it's raw and unfiltered. That's why I'm trying to tell people this is the one where, so the second one is revised and expanded, and then I'm talking to the world at large. But this book is where I'm talking to our people. Okay, someone who belonged to them and served them.
Absolutely.
Okay? And so this is the book you want to have.
This is the book. This is the book.
This is the book you want to have, just to be quite frank.
Yes, right? Yes, Dr. Wright. Yes, Dr. Wright. And Brother Garrett, don't come in here talking about already cutting off, man. It's your internet, man. It's your internet, brother. Go out and come back in. Don't be coming in here messing up the chat, talking about people chat cutting out. It's your internet, brother. Okay, it's internet. And Marciana Pender, so she is saying yes. She is saying the first edition. Okay, she's saying get this edition, Marciana. Okay, get this edition. That's what she's saying. Okay, that's what she's saying.
And on this website that you see there.
Absolutely. And peace to my little brother, Jehudi Ma'at, in the building. Peace to you, little bro. All right. And so, look, Doc, you actually we're moving into my first question.
Okay.
And I read this in the preface. I know they say preface, but I say preface. You know how Black folks are. We say preface, and then, And then on Google, when you Google it, she says preface, so anyway. But I read it just as you instructed me to do.
Okay.
And you said here, and I'm going into this,
Mm-hmm.
you said that, I'm looking for it right now. You started talking about Lewis Harlan.
Yes.
And you said that Lewis Harlan, and actually I'm on page, I think it's Roman numeral 10.
Okay.
And so you say right here that it says scholars, historians, and intellectuals who have shaped and defined Washington's legacy and excluded him from the canon of Pan-Africanists, because I was surprised when I read the title and it says Booker T. Washington in Africa, the making of a Pan-Africanist. Remember when we talked on the phone, I said, Doc, I've never heard anyone refer to him as a Pan-Africanist.
Right.
Typically, people will call him an Uncle Tom, and I'm not being disrespectful. Peace be upon his
no,
soul.
I see it on the back
People,
of the book. Yeah.
but people would call him an Uncle Tom. They said that he said a lot of things and did a lot of things to appease white people and to earn the respect of white people. And so that kind of left a bad taste in a lot of folks. No one puts him, when we talk about Pan-Africanism, no one puts Booker T. Washington up there with a Pan-Africanist. But anyway, you say right here that you say scholars, historians, and intellectuals who have shaped and defined Washington's legacy and excluded him from the canon of Pan-Africanists have also omitted his role in African affairs. Historian Lewis Harlan, Booker T. Washington's primary biographer, had an uninterrupted monopoly on the interpretation of Washington, the historical figure. Harlan produced two biographies, Booker T. Washington, The Making of a Black Leader, 1856 to 1901, followed by Booker T. Washington, The Wizard of Tuskegee, in 1901 to 1915. You talked about how he received several awards and he was funded by the Librarian Congress. But then you said that this dude didn't even like Booker T. Washington. Right. You said in your book that he had a disdain for Booker T. Washington. So I want to unpack that for a little bit. Let's talk about Lewis Harlan, right, and the information that he published that shapes what we think and feel about Booker T. Washington. Let's start with that, Dr. Wright.
Right. So thank you so much for that question. But yes, so Lewis Harlan was a white American male who was a historian, a scholar. I give you his, how would you say, the scholarly line he comes out of. He studied under Van Woodward, who studied under Du Bois. And Lewis Harlan is, someone who ends up at Tuskegee with a major grant from the Library of Congress to edit the Booker T. Washington papers in the 70s, because that's when they get released. Lewis Harlan, and the interesting thing about it is that I never, you and I discussed this, I usually will say maybe at the end or something that I'm a Tuskegee alumni, but I am a Tuskegee alumni, and the individuals who were at Tuskegee at the time that Lewis Harlan is there editing the Washington's personal papers with the grant from the Library of Congress, I know those individuals. One of them is deceased, and I knew him, Dr. Danny Williams at Tuskegee. He was our longtime archivist. And Mrs. Wilson, who was the assistant archivist for many, many years. Okay. And she's retired, and I'm still in touch with her. That being said, both agreed that Lewis Harlan was largely uncommitted to the project and not serious at all about it. It just was a gold mine in terms of work a scholar can do, but he got an enormous amount of money. You can imagine someone probably gets a good funding just to write or edit one book. He is editing 15 volumes of Washington's personal papers. So what he's actually doing is taking Washington's personal correspondence to and from various people all over the world and within the United States, and he is putting editorial notes into them. So he doesn't preserve the actual transcription. He's transcribing it, but he's also giving his own little editorial comments at the bottom. Now, this is a massive collection. It's 15 volumes. Each volume's no less than 300 pages of straight correspondence to and from various people. And there's 15 of these volumes. So he was largely uncommitted. So there are a lot of editorial errors, okay, in the Booker T. Washington papers themselves, itself. And there's 1,000 boxes today of Booker T. Washington's personal papers that are still unedited. Okay.
Wow.
Now, where I come in at is that I actually go through all 15 volumes. And at the time, the collection, the volumes were on the University of Illinois at Chicago online. So you could actually search the collection, literally put terms in and search the entire 15 volumes for those terms. And what I do is I elevate everything related to any part of Africa and any of the countries and individuals that I know that he is involved with, and am able to take all of those correspondence and put it together and make sense of it. Now, the issue here with Lewis Harlan is that, one, he was uncommitted to the project. Two, he came to the project with great animus already. He had notions about Booker T. Washington. Now, let's just, because this is an inside conversation, so let's just be real. How many white Americans are even in a position to call any Black person an Uncle Tom, or just assess them from, any perspective? Like, Washington wasn't here for them, and I'll get into that. He wasn't attempting to serve anybody who was white anyway. So the fact that Lewis Harlan felt like his opinion about Washington mattered really is interesting to me. I don't dare talk about people who serve their own people. Do you get what I'm saying? So
Absolutely.
If I was Asian and there's a Asian leader, I'm not from that culture, so I wouldn't even dare pontificate about who that person is to those people. Okay, he's not in, or she's not in service to me, so I would not have that insight. But that has everything to do with just arrogance. Okay,
call it what it is, Dr. Wright.
Right, thinking that you can weigh and measure people and a culture and understand. And so I make it very clear, the idea that Lewis Harlan could understand Washington, the man, and who was born into enslavement, survived it, and would establish an institution and then go on to challenge U.S. policy and preserve an African nation. He can't even fathom what that is. So he's not even in a position, to assess Washington. But nonetheless, he has this grant from the Library of Congress, and he is preserving the papers. He writes 2 autobiographies on Booker T. Washington. And the second one, where he calls him the Wizard of Tuskegee, he's being facetious for sure. Okay, because the wizard is like the Wizard of Oz, the person behind the curtain, trying to be sort of, facetious about it, like that the man never showed his face. Now he's right about that. I would say my assessment in terms of studying Washington, and I'm an expert on Washington and his role in Africa. I don't ever dare to really talk a lot about Washington in American context, because I get that information by proximity, right, to the subject matter, right? But I'm an expert on Washington and his role in Africa, which is something very specific. That being said, Harlan is, trying to, one, make his career off of the legacy of Washington. Okay, so he writes the 2 autobiographies. He edits Washington's personal papers. He writes numerous articles on Booker T. Washington. One of them being, and one of the most important, which signaled to me that I needed to do this work, was an article called Booker T. Washington and the White Man's Burden.
Ooh, teach, Dr. Wright.
And that is a well-buried article. It's still available if you have access to academic scholarly databases. You can still find that article. And what Lewis Harlan does in that article is very problematic, because he lists in that article all the African nationalists and nationals that Booker T. Washington is in contact with. And then he says, but it didn't mean anything. It meant nothing. Washington's relationship to Africa was very much the same as a colonial administrator. Now, just the audacity. So this is what the work of what a scholar does. You don't take that person's word for it. You go right back there to the
source,
and you find the source.
That's right.
And part of my work that's included in this book is every single person that Booker T. Washington was in contact with, that was born on the African continent and in contact with him and communicating with him. I literally located each and every correspondence. So that's where Chilimbwe comes in, and Dayz Muhammad Ali comes in, and Dude from South Africa comes in, and many others that Washington is in contact with. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I can see literally what Washington is saying to them and what they are saying to Washington. And then I make sense of those relationships myself, coming from obviously a very different perspective than Harlan. But see, that's where the critical issue is. What has happened for the last 100 years plus is that we have allowed other people to actually do that work.
Come on, Doc.
Instead of doing it ourselves. And so what you know about Booker T. Washington is what white liberal scholars have given you about him. Nothing else. That's all you know about him. None of what is in the public realm about Booker T. Washington actually comes from Booker T. Washington.
Oh, no, wait a minute, Doc. I had to interject. Let me interject, Doc. So what about when people say, well, I've read the book Up From Slavery, and I've read some of other Booker T. Washington's work. Where did that come from? Did that come from him, or that was an interpretation, or?
Okay, so Booker T. Washington's autobiography, I would say that is him.
Okay.
I would say that's him. But in kind, there is another book that Washington writes that's very similar to Up From Slavery, and it's called The Story of the Negro, The Rise of the Race from Slavery. And the book is all about Africa. In the same way that Booker T. Washington attempts to tell his autobiography, tell his story, he attempts to tell the story of the African person who he is saying that calling the Negro at the time. But it's the story of us from the African continent to America, and he identifies us culturally. So in other words, there's a chapter that says the Negro at home. He doesn't mean America, he means Africa. And he delineates, honestly, even more than my book, and I say this very often, if you want to know Washington's position on Africa, read The Story of the Negro. It was published in 1909, and he tells you all his deepest predilections, thoughts, feelings about Africa and African people. Okay, and he's quite versed. It's chapter 2 in my book where I break all of this down, Why is he interested in Africa? Because he is initially interested in Africa, probably even before he gets to Tuskegee. He has a desire. He writes that I had a desire to be involved in Africa in some significant way. But once he's roped into Tuskegee, he realizes that he's not going to leave Tuskegee to go to Africa. So he begins to figure out how to share his best thing, which is the perfected Tuskegee model with the African world. So, but the story of the Negro gives you all of that, but we don't know. You almost never hear about the story of the Negro, which is the autobiography of a people, right? Written by him. And most of it, I would say 80% of it, is about Africa, African culture, African people, period. The reason why we don't know about it is because in 1909, when it is published, the conversation is about enforcing those Reconstruction amendments to the Constitution, challenging, social and political climate in the United States, right? The idea here was that, we had fought the Civil War. We got our Reconstruction amendments. As some say, those amendments are written in blood. And so most people were about advancing those rights related to the Reconstruction amendments. That was the conversation of the time. And that was Du Bois' conversation primarily as well. But Washington publishes this book. The book was really written somewhere around 1900, 1901, and is not published until 1909. So this book goes unnoticed and even criticized for not talking about social and political rights. Well, listen, I don't know, but I think it's always time to write a book about who we really are.
Come on, Dr. Wright.
So I don't know that, he was obligated to talk about social and political rights in this book when he is attempting to tell the story of a people. Okay?
Well, let me ask you this, Doc. Let me interject. Did Booker T. Washington, I don't want to say that he wasn't concerned with civil rights, but he said, civil rights will come. Let's get our economics straight. Is that really what his mindset was, Dr. Wright? Like, I know W.E.B. Du Bois, he wanted to fight for the civil rights and integration. And Booker T said, we can get all of that. We have land over here. Most of us who came out of slavery, right. We have a certain skill set. We have some skills that we can utilize, and we can cultivate our own land, build up our economics, and that'll come. The whole civil rights, that stuff will come. But we could just, let's go over here and build our economic empire first. And do I have it right, Dr. Wright?
Yeah, to a large degree, you do have it right. However, so the way it's cast, though, in the public realm and historically, is that it was this hard line with regard to Washington and social and political rights. And that's not actually true. Okay. There's so many things when you say that I think of, because I know off the top of my head, just all the, scenarios, having been through the Washington papers. But example, this was his relationship to social and political rights. No problem. Get that. However, yes, the Tuskegee philosophy, and this is also wrapped into his form of Pan-Africanism that he expresses. His method is independence through industry. So his idea is to own and operate, own your own, build your own, become sustainable. Tuskegee is really a sustainable industrial community that masqueraded as a school. Okay, so
say that again, Doc. Say that again. You got to say that one more time.
It's really an industrial and sustainable community that masqueraded as a school. And I'll get a little more into that because chapter 3 of the book talks about the Tuskegee model in Africa and really what the Tuskegee model was. And many people noticed that Tuskegee wasn't simply a school. Okay, this is common knowledge at the time, at least for people who studied the model. So, in other words, Tuskegee and Tuskegeans are producing everything that they consume. And if we understand anything about nationhood, we know that you want to create industry to build your nation, right? You don't want to be an extraction site for other countries and people. You want to build your nation from within. So that is what he perfected at Tuskegee. So he wasn't opposed to social and political rights, but he was certainly someone who was into perfecting sustainable African communities. And he's very involved in that. And I'm going to say this: there are people who noticed. There was the man named Dixon, Thomas Dixon, who was someone who was involved in a vendetta with Booker T. Washington, who noticed this. And the name should ring a bell for people who know sort of the historical landscape at that time. Thomas Dixon was the author of a book called The Klansman.
I heard of The Klansman.
It's right. And that is the book that inspired the film called Birth of a Nation at the turn of the century, which was at the turn of the 20th century, 1900. And the point of the book was to rally for the second time the Klan around this idea of protecting their community and their women. And so Thomas Dixon was keeping an eye on Tuskegee, paying attention to Booker T. Washington. And what he thought was that this guy has you Southern whites and you Northern whites as well thoroughly fooled. He's saying one thing in the public realm, but watch what he's doing. Sort of what I always say. It's not what you say, it's what you do. Let me see the walk. Let me see the walk. I don't care about what you say. Let me see the walk, because that'll tell me everything I need to know.
Ashe.
So look, Thomas Dixon is watching Tuskegee. Let me just I don't want to jump around, so I'm going to finish up on your question, but let me just read this little bit that Thomas Dixon wrote in a Philadelphia paper about Tuskegee, the model. And he called himself doing what people also often do today, calling him out. He's calling Washington now. He's calling the Tuskegee model out because he's like, no, these guys are not innocent. That guy is not innocent. He's the leader of it all, but they're not. And what I mean by innocent is that this guy is not sterile, neutral,
And that's what white folks, they say that's what white folks believed about Booker T. Washington. They saw Booker T. Washington as non-threatening. And they said, hey, they said he's non-threatening. They were happy that he accepted segregation. So they figured, oh, he accepts his inferior position in their minds, right? Here's some money. You're saying that you want to, you're fine with segregation. White folks weren't, they were opposed to integration. So they were like, okay, cool. You've accepted segregation. Here's some money. Go it off and do your thing.
Right.
But black folks criticized Booker T from taking that white money, know, but Booker T took the money and he did his own thing. And he said, so I'll have these white folks thinking one way while I'm going out here doing something completely different.
Right. And honestly, I always think that's, yes, you're correct about that. And the reality is it's always funny to hear our contemporary views around the politics of taking white money when most of us work for white institutions and in corporate and all of that kind of stuff. So the legacy of enslavement is poverty. They became perpetually wealthy while we became perpetually in poverty and poor. So all the money here is white money made off the backs of African people. right?
Mm-hmm.
So like,
Mm-hmm.
so almost there's not one of us you'll see, except for maybe now. We don't get me wrong, we are doing it in terms of entrepreneurship here and on the continent. But before this moment, a lot of what all of us are up to is working for white institutions. The problem with the difference with Washington is that he wasn't serving himself, he was serving our people.
Mm.
That's the difference. And the other part of it is that he didn't take the money and run off into the sunset. He built a sustainable African community called Tuskegee, and he never lost his way home. Most of us lose our way home.
Mm.
Okay, Washington never did. Most of us, we take the money on a day-to-day basis. I make it a point to spend my money with African people.
Come on,
But guess
Doc.
what? Those African people who I'm spending my money with, where do they live? Do they live in an African community, or do they take it back to somebody else's community?
Mm.
Okay, here and on the continent are locations where we are, and our bodies have been extraction sites and tools of extraction for wealth, other people's wealth. Let's be clear about Washington. He takes whatever he gets, begged, borrowed, or stole, back to Tuskegee.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm.
And as we build that school, we are compensated for it. And the money stays in that community at least 26 times. So there's analysis around that period about how many times the money rotates right within the Black community. And so the money is coming into Tuskegee. Yes, there's a flush of money. And people, yes, I've heard this argument a million times. Well, is it really sustainable because you're getting white money? Okay, yes. However, the labor that is being employed to build the institution is the labor of the students. And so there's a sustainable labor force there that can survive economic fluctuation during that period. And the students are not enslaved in any way. They are being paid for that labor. And most of the students at Tuskegee at the time were on the work program, which Washington created, meaning your first year at Tuskegee Institute, you worked for the institution full time and you went to school part time. The remaining 4 years, you worked for the institution part time and you went to school full time. So every student who actually comes to Tuskegee is earning their keep, and they are a consistent part of the labor force at Tuskegee, erecting the school buildings specifically, but also the custodians of keeping it running, this sustainable model. Okay, so I'll stop there, but I just want to give you some context about what Tuskegee was, because a lot of people, and even Tuskegeans, there are people, everybody's not a historian. So many people at Tuskegee do many different things, right? I'm a historian and I was a student of history when I was at Tuskegee. So this is the kind of stuff that I study. So I know the details that other people may not know, right? That being said, they're right there in the Washington's personal papers in the Tuskegee archives and collection in terms of how the institution was constructed, built, sustained, and what it actually was. Because I would argue that it is, one, a sustainable industrial model. Two, I don't think Washington had that much of a problem, nor did other African people who had survived the institution of slavery with separating themselves. I do not think that. And matter of fact, I know that they did not have that much of a problem.
Come on.
Because white Americans, particularly during this period that we call the age of Booker T. Washington, it is coincided by a period called the Nadir, Nadir, which is the most violent period in American history, and it's called our lowest point. That's what Nadir means in particular. It's our lowest point because the level of and waves of violence by whites, I'm not even going to say Southern whites in general, white
teach
Americans, is unparalleled. Okay, They could not compete with us. And, there's so many things going on here, but they couldn't compete with us. We're 50 years out of enslavement, and we are looking them eye to eye on every level. And not to mention, we are the skilled persons in this country. So there was a very sharp and swift progress by African people who survived the institution of enslavement. 250 years of enslavement, 50 years of freedom, and we are on level with them in so many ways. Nobody expected that, and it's actually never happened in the history of the world. They know that. In the last case that I talk about in this book, the African exclusion measure, which I want to make sure I get to now, not now, but before we're done, because it's why I can say Washington was a Pan-Africanist.
No, we can move. Yeah, that was my next question.
Well, okay,
I was literally
it's
kind of like you're going right in the direction of the interview, because that was literally my next question.
Okay.
Why would you consider Booker T. Washington a Pan-Africanist? I never heard that before.
Right. And I'm going to tell you, because there's two policy cases in here. But what I was going to say is that Anglo-Americans, white Americans in that I note in that case, who are arguing on the floor of the House of Representatives in Congress for and against African and Black immigration to this country. One of them notably says that the story of African people in this country is an epic story. There is not history of a people in 250 years of chattel enslavement who have risen out of that in such a swift manner. It has never happened in the world. See, this is the problem with us. We don't see ourselves like that, right? And that's a whole nother conversation, but that's us. We've ripped out of the institution of slavery, not to mention that we are the people who defeated the institution of enslavement. So we should always talk about ourselves as a victorious people. But and the details of that are still remain to be unraveled and told. But the reality is that that's unparalleled in the world. If it were any other people, this congressman says, if it were any other people, we would be praising them. But it's our people here who were once a free source of labor. So we're not going to, praise that. But that is unparalleled in the world. And so, Washington, so to get back to that period, this period that Washington is functioning in at his height, 1901 to 1915, is a brutally violent period where that progress is been seen post-Reconstruction. And the only way to remedy that progress is to murder us. There's no, real sophisticated, legitimate way to address or redress the progress of African people who survived the institution of slavery. It is straight out and out serious waves of violence and murder that they now would like to cover up and act like it never happened.
Facts.
Okay. So that is the period that Washington is functioning in. He cannot afford to show his face. Okay. And I really, I'm going to step outside this conversation for 2 seconds, just as, not a scholar, but just as a regular human being, an African person who is a descendant of African people who defeated the institution of enslavement in this country.
Come on, Doc.
How dare some of us most of the time? We don't make no sacrifices on a daily basis. The first thing any of us say is that, well, I would do such and such, but, I got to keep my job. Are you serious? Okay. None of us know what it is like to not only be responsible for our lives, but a couple of thousands of people's lives all in one place and surrounded by venomous whites who could at any point in time come there and lynch everybody. A South African brother named Dayz comes to the United States and visits Hampton and then makes his way to Tuskegee and meets with Booker T. Washington. He's not impressed by Washington when he does meet with him. He says Washington is very preoccupied. But then he goes back to South Africa and he pens a small pamphlet called My Tuskegee Pilgrimage. And in it, he writes that now he understands that Booker T. Washington was preoccupied because here he is with his students in the guts of Southern United States and surrounded on every side by venomous whites who at any point, and these are his own words, at any point could have lynched everyone and bombed and leveled the whole industrial community all in one night.
That's a fact. That's a fact.
And most of us don't want to take a L or a hit on the job and miss a paycheck.
No, but
like,
no, Doc,
I want to say, shut up.
No, Doc, I agree 100% with you. There was a debate a while ago. There were two like African-centered research groups going back and forth about Queen Nzinga, and they were one African-centered research group called her a hero, called her Shiro. They said she was a hero. She was a warrior. She saved her people from the Portuguese by, by making connections with the Dutch, but then the other people called her an enslaver and said, oh, we shouldn't. She gave the Dutch X amount of African people, per year. And so she was an enslaver. And so with the brother, that's his name. He was trying to tell them, look, man, when you read history, man, you got to look at history, through the lenses of the people who lived it, like during that time period, like what happened, during that time period. She was kind of in a bind, like you said. And so I agree 100% with you, Dr. Wright. It's easy for us in 2022 to sit back here and say what we would have done and the move we would have made. And we're not, but we weren't in those situations. And so people come off extremely judgmental. But like you said, in 2022, you're scared to do certain things because you don't want to lose your $15 an hour job. But then you sitting here judging Booker T. Washington and not understanding what he was going through. Absolutely.
I've had this conversation with another colleague of mine, and he, we get pigeonholed into these Du Bois of Washington conversations, and it's really ridiculous because I will dispel that to the book. The first version of the book dispels that as well, because that's not real. That's smoke and mirrors. But, I said to him, he said, oh, well, Du Bois was sitting on the porch in Atlanta during the riots. And I said, yes, but what do you know about being responsible for not only your life, but hundreds of people's lives? What do you know about that? And what really, and this is not to take anything away from Du Bois, but what did he know about that? He was responsible for himself. Okay? He did not have hundreds, a few thousand people in one place whose lives he was responsible for and boxed in by southern white counties in Alabama. I went to school there. I know Tuskegee is in the woods now. It was definitely the woods there back then. Okay. So you don't even, they don't know that life. They don't know what that is. So let me just give you an understanding through this particular comments and article that was written by Thomas Dixon as he calls Tuskegee out, right? About what it actually is. And he's attempting to, air Washington out.
He was trying to expose them. He was trying to expose him.
Exactly. And he used the only medium he could, which was the press, right? That was the primary means of communication for people at the time, public communication with the masses. So he writes, Mr. Washington is not training Negroes to take their place in any industrial system of the South in which white men direct or controls him. He is not training his students to be servants and come at the beck and call of any man. He is training them all to be masters of men, to be independent, to own and operate their own industries, to plant their own fields, buy and sell their own goods in every shape and form, destroy the last vestige of dependence on the white man for anything. Every pupil who passes through Mr. Washington's hands ceases forever to work under a white man. Not only so, but he goes forth trained as an evangelist to preach the doctrine of separation and independence. So that quote is the beginning of chapter 3. I open every chapter with a quote. That's Thomas Dixon. And that comes from an article called Booker T. Washington and the Negro, Some Dangerous Aspects of the Work of Tuskegee. And it was published in the Saturday Evening Post, Philadelphia, in August of 1905. And basically, he is saying, so let's step back and dissect it. Is it true? Okay, I've had the chance to assess the Tuskegee model. Yeah, to a large extent, it is true. Because Tuskegee is not simply an industrial and vocational school. Actually, it's not that at all. And it never was.
And that's what I always thought. It was a vocational school.
No,
Talk about it, Dr. Wright. So you said Tuskegee was not a vocational school. Let's go.
No, not a vocational and industrial school. It is a school for teachers that taught the academics and trades. So in other words, everyone who went to Tuskegee then and now is actually trained to be a teacher and is required to master 2 industries. So trained in the academics and then master 2 industries so that they can go out and teach not only the academics, but mastery of those 2 industries, whatever industries they chose to study, of which there were 44 industries present at Tuskegee. So the original charter of Tuskegee in 1881, which defines the school, and the school is called the Negro Normal School at Tuskegee, it says precisely, and it's in detail in chapter 3 of this book. It says it is a school for teachers, and I take that right from the institution's charter. And let me say this: it's a school for teachers. And it also is, there was something else I wanted to note there. A school for teachers that from the beginning, and I look at the first curriculum, right? Because as a researcher, I'm not saying what I want to say. I'm sharing the evidence, right? So, the truth is actually better than any of us could even be thinking of or thought of. So the school always had pedagogy and history from its inception. Who studies pedagogy? You know this. You're a professor too. Nobody other than teachers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Pedagogy. Some people, I don't know. Some people might be watching and like, what is pedagogy? That's right. Most people who are not going to teach would not even be concerned with pedagogy.
Absolutely.
Pedagogy is the art of teaching.
Absolutely.
From its inception, no skilled laborer, a plumber, a shoemaker, a mattress maker, a dressmaker, a tailor, is concerned with pedagogy.
Absolutely.
Not at all. History is part of the curriculum from the beginning as well. Okay, so that there is a nod to the fact that there was intellectual development, because history is the study of power over time. If all you're doing is fixing or making something, why are you studying history? History is the study of power over time, the movement of power, who has it, what they did with it, who didn't have it, how we struggled it away, what we did with it, who we served. Okay, all of that. That's the study of how power is moving through human beings over a period of time. Nobody who is not interested in making an assessment of human politics is studying history. Okay, so Tuskegee was an institution always built for teachers. that is clear. And I do like to tell briefly about the establishment of Tuskegee, because a lot of people don't know that Booker T. Washington did not initiate Tuskegee. That's another.
Now, let me tell you, the first person who told me that was
Mhm.
Professor James Small.
Yes,
He
right.
told me it was some people, and I'll let you explain it. But he told me that because I always like what the story that I heard was that he established Tuskegee,
Mhm.
and him along with the students, they built Tuskegee brick by brick, with their own hands. But Professor James Small was the first person who said no. He actually got a call, and he went down there, and he had basically nothing really to work with, and
Mhm.
he
Right.
built that into a university. But go ahead, Dr. Wright.
Right. Absolutely. Tuskegee is born out of the community. And I believe that for me, actually, that's more powerful than to think that this very young man, 26 years old, went down there and started this all by himself. Tuskegeans were politically astute coming out of Reconstruction period. They were voting. They're one of the Black communities that are very progressive. Even Kwame Ture talks about Tuskegee and Black power. Bless you. So
Thank you.
he so Tuskegeans are politically astute. After Reconstruction is ended, there is a white male politician by the name of Foster who he's the incumbent senator. He wants to be reelected. He knows about Tuskegee and the progressive nature of it, and he solicits Lewis Adams, a man who had survived the institution of enslavement. And he is a community leader in this progressive Black community. And he asked him to organize the Black vote in his favor. Lewis Adams does so. And when it's all said and done and Foster is reelected, he comes back to Lewis Adams and asks Lewis Adams, like, what do you want? Pretty much for organizing the Black vote. Now, this is important because it speaks to who we were at that moment in time when Tuskegee is conceived. Lewis Adams could have said, hey, I need a team of oxen, to plow the land. I'm an agriculture. I need that land over there. I need this, that, whatever. He could have, and this is the significant difference so often between us then and us now, right? Because most of us posed with the same scenario probably wouldn't even think to ask for anything for someone other than themselves. But Lewis Adams says these specific words: I want a school for my people. I want a school for my people. That's what I want. Not something for myself. A school for my people. It says so much about our values, right? The value of education. Who's more deprived than someone who lived and survived enslavement? Even your body is not your own. And it didn't even occur to him to say, I want this for me. So that initiates, or it is initiated by Foster. He goes back to the state of Alabama and lobbies and gets $2,000 allotment from the state of Alabama for the Negro normal school at Tuskegee. This money is not for a building. It's not for materials. It's just $2,000 a year to hire teachers for the institution that doesn't even really exist. That's all. The school is in a one-room house, which is a church, an AME church in Tuskegee. It is then that Lewis Adams and others write Armstrong at Hampton and ask them to send a teacher, a principal. And Armstrong sends Booker T. Washington. And let me just side note, because there's some people who are recent PhDs who think they know what Tuskegee is in relationship to Hampton and know who Washington was in relationship to Armstrong. Most of that is incorrect. Tuskegee is not Hampton, although Washington learned some things at Hampton that he would implement at Tuskegee.
Right.
But until people have read the personal correspondence between Armstrong, who was a white male and I think former general, and Booker T. Washington, then you don't know anything about their relationship. Period. That's all I have to say. You don't know anything about it, because unless the relationship is not exactly as people might think. He's not exactly Armstrong's protege. Armstrong is not thinking nothing about Africa. Okay. So let's be very clear about that. So we have to read. I love the just the concept that you don't earn the right to speak unless you read.
That's right. Come on, that's right.
We're just talking, we're repeating what we heard, right? What Marvin Gaye said, don't believe half of what you believe, half of what you hear,
none of what you see and half of what you hear.
That's right. None of what you see and half of what you hear. Exactly.
No, absolutely. And
right.
Dr. Wright, I couldn't agree with you more.
Unless you know the facts, don't speak on it. Read a little bit before you want to speak on it. So Washington comes to Tuskegee, 26 years old, to erect that school. And that's why he always called himself the principal, not even the president. Called himself the principal of Tuskegee. And he comes there and he does something significant. So let me just clear this point up. Washington is there in 1881, the first principal. He builds Tuskegee, and this is why we can consider him the father of Tuskegee, because he raises that baby, he builds it, he feeds it, he nurtures it. But in 1893, the second charter of the institution is established, and Washington does what is sort of a signature move of who he is at that point. He tells the state of Alabama, keep your $2,000. Keep your $2,000. I can raise more money for the school on my own. He goes on the road with Ford and raises money for the Negro normal school at Tuskegee. And he makes the institution independent and gives it back to the people. Okay? Period. End of relationship with the state of Alabama in that way. Okay? And he takes on the task of raising monies as he travels throughout the country to build and support Tuskegee, which means he creates a board of trustees. He establishes a new charter for the institution, which once again is a school of for teachers, and raises more money than the state of Alabama could ever have given or would have ever wanted to give Tuskegee. Okay, so that is why today Tuskegee has a very unique status and classification. It is quasi-private. It is private, but state affiliated when it needs to be. When it needs to be. Okay? We're so used to serving other people that we don't even know what it looks like to serve our own people. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
So we do so much dancing only to pay the bills. We don't know what it looks like to maneuver to create something that very likely had not existed before and is all a resource to our people, like building an institution. Who told Washington that he should make the institution independent? Right? Many people would have stayed roped up with the state of Alabama in that way that it was. Okay? He didn't do that. And we have to be very clear, like you said, put people in their proper context.
That's
Historical
right.
context.
That's right. Proper historical context.
Right. This is a man born in enslavement, in chattel slavery. Okay. The most brutal form of enslavement the world has ever known. Perpetual enslavement. You're not going to be free. Your children are not going to be free. Your children's children and children's children are not going to be free. Okay. If they could control it. That's what perpetual enslavement was. And this man had these ideas. I'm gonna take the money from the state of Alabama for the moment, and then we're gonna make this independent and give it back to the people in the community. You know, and that was great foresight, and it's part of the reason why when some other historically Black colleges have suffered, Tuskegee has not exactly suffered in the same way, because the land itself belongs to the institution. There were lands donated to the institution by the formerly enslaved persons of that community. Okay, so the school itself is an asset of the community, right? Not something given to them, not something founded for them by another people, which, not to knock any of my other HBCUs, but there is a notable difference. Okay. Before, let's say I won't put a date on it, but traditionally and historically, if you were from Tuskegee, you went to the Institute, because the community and the institution were one. The institution is born out of the community. Lewis Adams and the progressive attitude and consciousness of Tuskegeans at that time. So there was no separation between the community and the institute for a very long time. They were one and the same. So, so I'll leave it there. But let me just note one other thing about the Tuskegee model, because a lot of us just don't really get that Tuskegee had 44 industries, and that was the sustaining force of the institution, meaning they were the inhabitants of the institution, but they were also the custodians and labor force of the institution. So, in other words, once you got that burst of cash, it was almost difficult to interrupt Tuskegee and their going on, because of the fact that they were not dependent on external forces in the same way that other institutions may be, right? So other institutions, very likely, you get an injection of money, and you need that continuously. But Tuskegeans are sustaining themselves. So let me just give you a little bit, be more specific about it. There was a journalist who also was studying the Tuskegee model and noticed what it was. And his name is Arthur Evans. He wrote for the Chicago Record Herald. And he writes about Tuskegee, a school. Tuskegee is not a school in the ordinary sense of the word. It's a city in itself, a community that dominates a whole county. It's a great industrial plant with 40 trades and industries, that consumes all its own products, that erects its own buildings, first making its own bricks, that grows its own food, makes its own clothes, writes and prints its own textbooks, all by way of education. So that's what Tuskegee was, right? And when I talk about that, I'm talking about the historical Tuskegee. I'm not talking about the Tuskegee of today. Let me be very clear, okay? Because it is something different today. But that is what Tuskegee is. It is a sustainable African community at a time where there were a lot of sustainable industrial Black and African communities in the United States, right? This one masqueraded as a school. That's the only difference, okay? And it's still there, right? They didn't level it, in spite of the fact that it was surrounded by venomous whites. So that is, sort of like context for what's going on at Tuskegee. And that is, so just to segue into the what makes Washington a Pan-Africanist, and even Garvey and other individuals that he's in contact with. What Tuskegee seeks to do with its 44 industries is share what they have perfected with the rest of the African world. Okay? In 1912, and I saw Professor Small speak on this particular point, so I just want to add a bit of clarity to
Please
it.
Please do.
He spoke about Washington, a conference that I actually dubbed it sort of Washington's Pan-African Conference, but it's actually called the International Conference on the Negro, and it is held in 1912 at Tuskegee. So it's not before the first Pan-African Conference, it's after that. But what it is Tuskegee opening up its 44 industries to the African world, so that people from all over the African world, what I mean by the African world is African people, Black people from the Caribbean, Central, South America, and the continent of Africa. Tuskegee opens up all of its industries and invites various people from the African world to come and examine those 44 industries and take with them the best practices that they have at Tuskegee in those industries. Because Washington is fully aware that he has perfected nation management skills by producing and building these 44 industries there. The plague of most African nations around the world is that we, once again, are used as extraction sites, producing raw goods and materials. And someone else takes it out, put it in a can, a box, and it sends it back to us for triple the price. Okay, raping the economy essentially and exploiting the people. Washington is like, no, I'm teaching you to perfect the industry. What you consume, you need to be producing that.
You know who says that? And people give him hell? Dr. Claude Anderson.
Right,
He said
exactly.
Dr. Claude Anderson said it in his book, Powernomics.
Exactly.
He said we need to be controlling the industries from the bottom up.
Exactly. So there's a concept that Washington promotes at Tuskegee. It's independence through industry. Now here in the United States, I don't know if it resonates, because at the time there are many sustainable industrial Black communities. Okay, most of us know one of the latter ones, which is the Greenwood section of Tulsa, Oklahoma. But there are too many. There are many. That's a work that's yet to be done. I don't know. Maybe I'll do it, but I wouldn't be mad at whoever gets to it first, because there are a lot industrial African communities, and Black people who survived enslavement are happy to be in them, because they know they would not be able to progress next to white Americans, Anglo Americans, given the levels of violence. That being said, the International Conference on the Negro brings the African world to Tuskegee, and part of the conference, and opens up those 44 industries for those methods to be taken back to the respective locales of the attendants. At the conference are 8 educators from the African island nation of Jamaica. And those 8 educators are there when the conference resolutions are made. And in the conference resolution is a resolution to build a Tuskegee-like institute in Jamaica. Okay? Because part of Washington's objective is to share the Tuskegee model. That being said, those 8 educators go back to Jamaica and share what they actually saw at Tuskegee with none other than Marcus Garvey.
Come on.
That's
come
how
on.
Marcus Garvey learns of what is actually happening at Tuskegee in 1912 with the International Conference on the Negro. From that point on, Marcus Garvey initiates contact with Booker T. Washington. He begins to write him. These letters between Booker T. Washington and Garvey are in the Booker T. Washington papers. All the correspondence from 1912 until the time of Washington's death in 1915. Washington and Garvey are communicating. One of the things that they have in common is that they are sharply criticized by other Black people in their locales, and they share that and they talk about that. But what Garvey does is, if you know the historical record, you see Garvey moving around the Caribbean attempting, he says, to raise money for a school. What school? The school that is in the resolutions of the International Conference on the Negro at 1912. The school that Washington proposes should be built in Jamaica. That's the school that Garvey is raising money for when he goes to Costa Rica and other places in the Caribbean. That being said, a lot of their correspondence details Garvey saying that Washington is the person who informed him of his doom to be a race leader as a result of reading Washington's autobiography, Up From Slavery. Then he actually comes to know Washington through direct contact between 1912 and 1915, and they share the things that I mentioned. Washington is the person who extends the invitation to Garvey to come to Tuskegee, but it's notable to understand one thing about how Garvey viewed Washington. In each and every letter between Garvey and Washington, Marcus Garvey signs it saying, your most humble and obedient servant. That's how he signs off in his letters to Booker T. Washington. Between 1912 and 1915, Garvey conceptualizes the Universal Negro Improvement Association. He designs it after the Tuskegee model to have various industries. He details that in a letter to Booker T. Washington, along with a pamphlet, which are also in the Booker T. Washington papers, showing Washington that he has designed this organization after the Tuskegee model. So Washington is Garvey's inspiration to serve African people. Tuskegee is the model that the Universal Negro Improvement Association is built on. Booker T. Washington invites Marcus Garvey to the United States to come and see Tuskegee. And before Garvey gets there, and we're going to talk about this, the African exclusion measure, Washington debunks U.S. legislation produced in the Senate to exclude anyone of the African and Black race, and notably Africans coming from Jamaica. And therefore, Marcus Garvey is able to come into the United States in March of 1916, 4 months after Booker T. Washington died.
So I just want to be clear, Dr. Wright.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying that if Booker T. Washington didn't get whatever was being proposed on the Senate floor, if he didn't defeat that, Marcus Garvey would have never came into the United States. Let's be clear.
Absolutely. So there's a case, and I guess this is, I want us to backtrack to the boys, and we can talk about that too, but there is a case in this book. So when people are like, how dare she, say a Pan-Africanist in the same sentence with Booker T. Washington, there are two cases in this book called one, the Liberian Crisis, which is detailed. All of them are detailed, and all of the cases are constructed as per Washington's personal papers, meaning the direct correspondence. And I want to, there's a couple of things I want to address, because there are a couple of scholars who think, let me not say they're scholars, because they're not. They're lay persons who have taken an interest in, well, they don't, this is not what they do, right? Some of them are journalists, some of them are people who are just interested in the subject matter. They have dared to go into this area, and I welcome people into this realm in terms of Washington and Africa, but it was largely untouched until I touched it. And the reason why is because we have been told not to touch Washington. So he was maligned in such a way that if you say anything about him, then you're Uncle Tom, like if you're this. So, but these are not based on facts, right? So white scholars in the academy, white liberal scholars in particular in the academy, have maligned him such that he has been untouchable, except for by them. We can't touch him though. And so we don't speak on it. I touched it, okay? And not only did I touch it, I exhausted it and threw the covers off of it. So I don't have, what I'm saying in the context of the book and even here is not my opinion about anything. Everything, and the way I changed the book from a traditional, typical editorial, end notes, I changed it to footnotes, so at the end of every page, you see where this came from. So it paid for itself. In other words, it earned everything, every word on that page earned its right to be there because it comes directly from Washington's personal papers. Now, another side note, one of these laypersons dared to say that Robert Parks edited Washington's personal papers. Personal, or ghost wrote, let me get it right. Ghost wrote Washington's personal paper. Let me just clear something up. Ghost writers don't touch people's personal papers. Booker T. Washington's personal papers were not opened until 1970. Okay? Washington is dead, Robert Parks is dead, and most of the people you find communicating with Washington in his personal papers are dead. Personal papers are what's happening in real time at that time, right? In communications, they're a secret. Most people don't open their personal papers until they're deceased because they don't want to talk to you about what's in there, and it's going to unravel a lot of things. Lewis Harlan edited Washington's personal papers. Robert Parks, a white male sociologist from the University of Chicago, was an employee of Booker T. Washington, who became a ghostwriter for him. He had nothing to do with Washington's personal papers. Matter of fact, Washington could have called him a monster in his personal papers. Robert Parks could have been sitting right next to him. He would have never known, because you don't see a person's personal papers, right? It's what you write in your diary. It's what you write to and from people. Nobody sees that at all. So Harlan, when Washington is dead, gets this grant from the Library of Congress to edit Washington's personal papers, and even he can't touch the content of the personal papers. He is only including editorial notes, of which it was very well flawed. Okay, but he does not get to disrupt. So anybody who is trained as a historian probably has done some transcribing work, right? Of wills and personal papers and things of that nature. I have, because I worked as an assistant archivist before I got my PhD. That being said, you don't get to add plus or minus any of that. Okay, you could put a little editorial note in there if you dare. However, you're not a part of what's in the personal papers, and there's 1,000 boxes of personal papers that are unedited. Okay, so I just want to clear that up. But yes, this situation with Marcus Garvey and Washington is detailed in Washington's personal papers. This case, the African exclusion case, African exclusion measure, is the basis upon which I call Washington a Pan-Africanist and the Liberian Crisis as well. There are two concrete policy cases in this book that detail all the facts in each of these cases, the public and private correspondence around the case and in the press at the time as well. Okay, so the Liberian Crisis is first in the book, and then the African exclusion measure is the final case. That case, which is about an amendment to the larger immigration bill of 1915, is proposed in December 31st, on December 31st of 1914, by a senator from Missouri named James Reed. James Reed, I don't need to say, is probably very likely an active racist because he seeks to, right, put his predilections into policy. He proposes a couple of other exclusionary measures that don't get passed in the Senate. But then he comes up with this idea to get real specific. And he says, exclude anyone of the African or Black race from the United States from 1915 on. And put them in the same category, deny them, and put them in the same category as undesirables and criminals attempting to enter the country. So here you have in the Senate record an attempt to criminalize Blackness, put Blackness and African identity in the same category as undesirables and criminals. And that is the basis upon which they would be denied immigration to the US. And marginalizing people, excluding them based on genealogy, right? And this fictitious construct of race, because we know race is not real, right? It is a social construct created by white nationalists, essentially.
Facts.
White Americans, right? Because make no mistake about it, America is an expression of white nationalism. Okay? So that's what James Reed seeks to do. He is successful in the Senate. It passes with no argument, with no debate on December 31st, 1914. Now, what provoked this? Why did he do it? Besides being a racist, I mean, why did he do this? In November of 1914, the Panama Canal was completed. The labor force on the Panama Canal came from the African and Black people from the Caribbean, Central, and South America. They were the masses of the labor force on the Panama Canal. Many of them died from yellow fever. That being said, they were paid U.S. wages. And it was just a side note, the setting was unbelievably racist. It was segregated because it was American. And that's the American way, right? It was segregated. So there were quarters for the Black and African laborers and quarters for the white administrators and service people who were on the project, this engineering project. When the canal is completed in 1914, James Reed, in the heart of America, right? Missouri, that southern state in the north, right? Subject of the Missouri Compromise, right? A slave state in the north. Certainly, and we know Missouri today, right? It's not that much different. He proposes this to say to those laborers who are Black and African on the Panama Canal, thank you for your labor and service. No, on the question of immigration. he believes that they have gotten used to U.S. wages and will then attempt to immigrate to the United States. So that is what provokes this measure on the last day of 1914. The measure is actually a small amendment, and it's attached to the larger immigration bill. It's due to go before the Congress in January of 1915, the first week between the 1st and the 7th of the month. Booker T. Washington was a person who read the Senate and the congressional record. He kept his eye on them. That's not somebody who trusts them. He kept his eye on them. He knows that this measure has been proposed and passed in the Senate. He understands it's going before the House of Representatives that week, the first week of January 1915. He begins to communicate in his correspondence with people on the Panama Canal to verify what he is hearing about this amendment to the larger immigration bill. He's able to confirm that, and this is all in the Booker T. Washington papers in terms of his correspondence. So not in the Booker T. Washington papers in the sense that, like, here, there's one sheet. No, you have to know who the people are, who he's writing to, the generals, the administrators on the Panama Canal, the other people involved in this that he's writing to. So he does three significant things. One, he confirms that this has in fact been proposed and passed in the Senate, 29 to 0, no challenge. He confirms that it's about to come up before the Congress the first week of the year. So in other words, there will be a debate in the Congress and a vote on the larger immigration bill that includes this little amendment, which I dub a measure. He knows that he's got to challenge this, and he understands why it's done. One, he exposes this legislation, this amendment, in the Black press, of which he still has significant influence and control of. So he writes an article and this is chapter 6 in the book. He writes an article called I think it's No Fair Play for Negro Immigrants, right? But let me show you what the opening of that chapter says. This is his actual words with regard to this article that he writes. He says, through your newspaper, I desire to appeal to the American Congress and to the people of the United States in favor of fair play and justice in connection with the immigration bill now pending before the United States Senate, which by amendment excludes from coming into this country any person of African descent.
You said this was chapter 6? Oh, yeah. Chapter 6. Okay, I was on chapter 7. Okay.
The page number would be
111.
Right. And so every chapter opens up with a quote. And this quote comes from the Booker T. Washington papers itself, because he keeps a copy of his correspondence with the newspaper. And so that's what it says. It says, through your newspaper, I desire to appeal to the American Congress and to the people of the United States in favor of fair play and justice in connection with the immigration bill now pending before the United States Senate. At that point, so he writes this, it had already passed by the time it reached the airwaves, basically. The immigration bill now pending before the United States Senate, which by amendment excludes from coming into the country any person of African descent. And I think it's important and notable to say, he doesn't say Jamaican descent, Haitian descent, Colombian or Brazilian descent. He says African descent. He's very clear. Okay. Why does he know that? Because some of us don't know that today.
That's right.
Okay. Some of us don't, like you say African, they say that's not me. That, so like, how does he know that? Well, chapter 2, I answered that, right? How he knows who he is and where he's at. So, and that's part of beginning to understand that he is a Pan-Africanist.
Now let's move into that, because I know
Okay,
that let's move into that. Then you said he
so
was a Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Doc. Go ahead.
no,
Finish your
no,
thought.
no. So what happens is the first aspect of his challenge to this measure is to challenge, expose it in the Black press to the masses.
Mm-hmm.
The second action he takes is to put into action, and I give the details of this because until this case that I wrote up, the details of how he does this or that he even did it, Harlan knew he did this, challenged the African exclusion measure, but it's not a constituted case and the details are not there. I actually raised the details out of history and put the case together. And so what it is he sends his Tuskegee machine to Washington, D.C. And what is the Tuskegee machine? The Tuskegee machine is the subject of great criticism of Booker T. Washington. It is his secret network of power brokers, most of them Black people, some of them, namely Grimke, Francis Grimke, a person who publicly has criticized Booker T. Washington, but that is not the true relationship. See, we're not astute to how we used to operate because we're so, we give it all away. Everything's in the public realm in the time we're living in now, right? People don't hold nothing to their chest. Many of the relationships Booker T. Washington had with people in the public realm were not what they were at all. Okay, Grimke is one notable person. Francis Grimke is part of the Tuskegee machine, this secret network of power brokers.
Woo.
He publicly criticizes Washington, but behind closed doors, he is a lieutenant in Washington's Tuskegee machine. He is, you see, the secret, you could say, correspondence between him and Grimke and others to go to Washington, D.C., and pull every string possible to defeat this unfair and racist measure. And they do that. They go to Washington, D.C., they go into the Congress during the same time that the conversation and debate on the floor of the House before the vote for this amendment is going on, and they challenge U.S. politicians. How do they do this? One, Washington's words that are in the paper, in the press, he has a relationship with a congressman from New York, and he gets that congressman to bring his words onto the floor of the House, which gives specifics to the immigration bill, that it would exclude people from Costa Rica, from Jamaica, from Trinidad, from Haiti, and I'm naming them because he names them, from the Dominican Republic. Yes, from the Dominican Republic, because they too are African and Black. From Puerto Rico, which is not yet a U.S. Commonwealth. It is still its own nation. Okay. And the people, yes, are African and Black. And so he names all of these people, and the congressman from New York brings these words to the floor of the House. But that's not enough. They hold up, through people they are in alliance with, they hold up the Congress to force a poll. What does that do? A poll forces each person in Congress who is present to vote to say how they intend to vote. Now, this network of, I can't tell you how many people it is, but I know it's a handful of people. Let's say maybe 10 people. Mm-hmm. Now they know which congressmen plan to vote yay or nay on this very amendment to the immigration bill. Now they can directly lobby and challenge them, and they do. The details are there in the Booker T. Washington papers, exactly how they do it, exactly who they talk to, exactly how they hold up Congress in this effort to throw out this measure. The details, the conversation now, you can't just do one side of the work. What do I do? So any historian knows that you're going to corroborate all of this. I go to the congressional record and I lifted the debate on the floor of the House around this exclusionary measure. And there is a ferocious debate on the floor of the House of Representatives for and against African immigration. Okay? My African brothers and sisters from the Caribbean, who sometimes are aligned and sometimes not aligned with Africans within the United States.
Come on, talk about it, Dr. Wright.
A direct defense. What Washington is doing directly was targeting that population. He's already in the United States. He could have said, "The hell with them. You know, you're not here. Too bad. You want to come here and benefit yourself? No, you can't." That's not his attitude. He's like, pull every string possible to defeat this measure. And
so wait. So Dr. Wright, I just want to be clear here. So Africans who've been coming over since the 1960s and 70s, it was an influx of African immigrants. It wouldn't have been possible without Booker T. Washington.
Impossible had this measure not been defeated. Let me read some of what happened on the Senate, the U.S. congressional record in the Senate. And this is the thinking of white legislators at the time with regard to this. We are beginning, this is James Reed, we are beginning to receive now some undesirable immigration of the African race from the West Indies. A great many Jamaican Negroes have been employed upon the Panama Canal, and after the termination of that work, having become accustomed to American wages, which they received down in Panama, a great many more of them begin to come to the Gulf ports, Florida and Louisiana, and have already received a considerable proportion of African immigration from the French and English West Indies. That is to say, immigration of West Indians who are wholly or partly African in race. That is what made them, so that is what they're saying on the floor of the House. This is what provoked this measure, right? From the horse's mouth.
Right, absolutely.
Let me be clear. So Washington is the one who writes this article. Here it is right here on page 114. The article was published in the New York World on January 2nd, 1915, under the title Fair Play for Negro Aliens. Now that's problematic, but okay. Booker T. Washington argued that the amendment was in fact unnecessary and a slight to the masses of African people residing in the southern U.S. The article began with an appeal to Congress and American citizens through your newspaper, so it's what I read. But he lists all of the African nations that would actually be impacted. And he's not, put it this way, he lists some of them, but all of African people around the globe would be impacted by this immigration bill. Primarily the Caribbean, Central, and South America, that's who's targeted, but it would exclude African people coming from the continent at all, period. Meaning African, anyone the African or Black race. So if you are culturally African or look Black in any way, shape, or form, they're talking about you. Okay? That's who, and notice the use of the word African repeatedly by legislators. Okay? They're not confused about who we are. We're confused very often, but they are not confused. I'm looking for the portion where he states all of the locales that would suffer as a result, because you have people coming from Costa Rica, Jamaica, so on and so forth, with regard to African immigration. Okay, here it goes. The bill would seem to prohibit citizens from the republics of Liberia, this is page 115, Cuba, Haiti, and some from Puerto Rico and Santo Domingo from entering the country, thus placing unnecessary hardship upon these smaller nations, which would not be done, in my opinion, if they were stronger. This is Washington talking. As Washington became more informed, he learned that the scope of the list extended to Jamaica, Trinidad, Panama, and Costa Rica. Nevertheless, it was not the nationality, but the specification of race and African ancestry that constituted the offensive nature of the measure. Booker T. Washington opposed the measure and used the data from the 1910 census to argue that there were only 40,319 foreign-born Negroes in the U.S., and only 473 of them had come from Africa. So this is happening. So this is 1915. He's using the 1910 census to say this is the small number of African people coming in. There were never a large number of African people entering the U.S., and the measure would close the doors to African people immigrating from anywhere in the world. So this Tuskegee machine is able to identify specific congressmen who are in favor of the bill. Let me say the adjustment to the new book, the expansion, is that I include more of the debate on the floor of the House of Representatives, so you can see, because people need to see. You know, I teach for the City University of New York, and I used to be at a campus that was a PBI, right, predominantly Black, and many of my students were African people from the Caribbean. Now, they probably wouldn't say that, but that is who they are, right? Identifiably African people from the Caribbean. And there's this conversation like, oh, yeah, you know, I was told when I came in, they're recent African immigrants to the United States from the Caribbean. They admit that they have been told that there is a preference for them in the United States over the African person who has defeated the institution of slavery. I'm gonna say that 100 times, right?
Say it again, Doc.
We defeated the institution of enslavement. They did not free us. We freed ourselves. But that being said, they will talk about a preference for them. Absolutely not. That's a game. That's a scam. That's propaganda. That's what they tell you so that they can work you for less money than they worked the last guy. But there is no preference for African people from the Caribbean, Central, or South America, period. And there is no preference for African people right here in this country who have been here and were the human fuel of this nation and defeated their precious institution of slavery, right? Of which 80% of the economy, right, was tied to it. That being said, so there are no preferences amongst us by Europeans. They don't prefer any of us, okay? And this is their blatant, open attempt to exclude African people from the Caribbean, Central, and South America after they exploited their labor, okay? Very direct and in your face. The debate on the floor of the House, and I'm going to include more of it in the expanded version, or it's more, there's a more full, fuller inclusion of the actual conversation, who's saying what, where they're from, their motivations, because there's two things that are revealed there. They are vehemently anti-African as it relates to African people in the Caribbean, Central, and South America, and are not interested in letting any of them come into the country. Okay? Period. End of story. But also, that is the context in which the one white congressman who I mentioned said that we have an epic story. That is the context. He says, in that space, you guys are full of it. These people were in 250 years of enslavement, 50 years of freedom, and nobody in the history of the world has made such sharp progress in that amount of time. Stop lying. You're afraid of them. They're not an adverse population. You're just afraid of them, because the people who can do that can do anything.
Ashe.
So you don't want them here, not because they're undesirables and criminals, because the ones that are here are certainly not undesirables and criminals. They have built this country, and they are the ingenuity in this country and the skilled persons in this country. This is why they can build their own communities, much to our chagrin. He goes into it. He tells that where in the world where you have a story that people can come out of that kind of perpetual enslavement and in only 50 years appear to recover and build their own communities intellectually and vocationally and industrially. There's not a record of it. I would love, if somebody's watching, if you got that, fine. You know, if you got a history of a people that's like that, there is no history of any people. I don't care where you scour in the world. It doesn't exist. That being said, that is the context. And like I said, it is a ferocious debate. My brothers and sisters from the Caribbean, Central and South America need to hear what white Americans felt about them. Okay? How they directly said, we don't want you here.
They called them undesirables.
Right. And criminals. Put them in the category just for being Black and ever call them criminals. And it is little old Booker T. Washington who saw this. Had he had to be educated on who African people in the Caribbean, Central and South America were, as many still need to be educated on who they are.
Facts.
Nobody is saying African Colombian, African Brazilian, African Panamanian, African Haitian, African Jamaican. Nobody is saying that. I have to applaud my brothers and sisters. Our goal is to say Africans in America. However, I take my hat off to us here who dare to say African first, even if you hyphenating it with that American. Okay?
Ashe.
Because nobody is doing that.
No, and
Dr. Right.
And Dr. Wright, what I want to say, because we're going to end in about 10 minutes, but what I wanted to say is you really built a beautiful case of just, you know, that Booker T. Washington was indeed a Pan-Africanist. You mentioned, first of all, you mentioned him defeating the African exclusionary measure. I'd never heard of it. Is it exclusionary or just exclusion?
It's the African exclusion measure.
Okay, the African exclusion measure.
Because we quick to talk about the Asian exclusion measure, but we don't know the exclusionary measure or its exclusion measure that would have locked us out.
Absolutely. So he defeated that, the African exclusion measure. Yeah. You said that he held a conference where he was teaching people. Well, now, was this conference on the continent or was it in the States?
It was at Tuskegee.
Okay, so it was at Tuskegee. There was a conference held, and there were people, you know, of African descent. You said, particularly Jamaicans who came there, but the goal of the conference was to reveal the Tuskegee model and to get the Tuskegee model
to
share it so that it would be established or implemented throughout the diaspora.
Right. And so the African continent. And the African Hayford from Africa comes.
Absolutely.
He's from Ghana.
Absolutely. And so in the last, if you had to use 5 minutes to talk about other things that would constitute Booker T. Washington as a Pan-Africanist, what would you add to that?
Okay. 5 minutes. All right. So the Liberian Crisis is the first case in the book, and Washington is the key negotiator in the Liberian Crisis. People who have not read the book and dare to, you know, venture and discuss this context have talked about, oh, well, that's just the typical Americo-Liberian situation. No, Washington is the key negotiator to stop the French and the British from annexing territories in Liberia. Okay. He is not aligned with the Americo-Liberian perspective. Matter of fact, when he gives his recommendations after having brought this case, because this is a case that is long and protracted, and he is the key advocate for this, negotiating the details. Side note, the cover on the book is the Liberian Commission in a garden at Tuskegee. I don't know if you can see that. I don't know which. Okay.
Yeah, we can see it. I can see
That's the Liberian Commission who he brings to Tuskegee, and he's working with them to facilitate preservation of Liberia, and he is successful. So I tell the whole story of that. And he criticizes them consuming Western goods. Like, listen, the way to build Liberia is to stop consuming Western garbage that they send you in a can. Other points. So that's the other case of how he preserves Liberia as a nation. That is nationalist. That's African nationalism. And finally, let me just say the other thing is a lot of people who dare to venture into this realm without expertise, and it's very problematic. That's why I'm speaking to it, have cited the Togo Expedition. You need to read my book and stop reading Zimmerman's book. Zimmerman is a white scholar who had the nerve to write a book called Alabama and Africa about an atrocious case called Togo, the Togo Expedition. And people who are not experts on this subject matter have read his book and think that that is Tuskegee's role in Africa. It is not. Read my book and you will understand that it is a human catastrophe. It is sharply criticized. Washington and some, well, I won't even get into it, but some people who don't know the landscape on this issue. And I would even criticize my own Tuskegeans because they did not know, right? Like, this is hard work to do, 15 volumes. A lot of this stuff is buried. So the point is that Togo was not initiated by Tuskegee or Booker T. Washington. German colonial administrators solicit Washington to have Tuskegee graduates come to Togo and work on a cotton expedition. Washington, if you understand his position regarding Africa early on, he is undeveloped. This is part of why I talk about his transformation. This book is a story of his transformation. How does he become a Pan-Africanist? It tells you all of that. Togo is that low point. Every graduate that goes to from Tuskegee that goes to Togo and works on the cotton expedition.
Now, question: was this expedition something that Booker T established, or this was something that was already?
And that's the point. One of the things that I saw Professor Small speak about: Tuskegee does not initiate this. Washington does not initiate this. Around 1900, one of the colonial administrators, German colonial administrators, writes Booker T. Washington and asks him for several graduates who are skilled in agriculture who could work on a cotton production expedition and project. Washington, overzealous, and if you read my book, you understand I level sharp criticism of this because I understand where it's coming from. Think about it. Washington is always secretly and not so secretly desired to go to the African continent himself. He realized he never will go. He lives vicariously through his students. So in 1900, while many things are going on, while he even has his hands in the first Pan-African Conference, which he is an organizer of, he is communicating and responding to the German colonial forces who say, can we have 9 experts in agriculture who can work on a cotton project? He says, okay. He knows not the extent, the context, the setting, and none of it is of their own making. Pan-Africanism always means we benefit, not someone else. So, but this is what happens when you let white scholars tell you what happened and you don't go to the direct historical record. We're so blessed to be able to go to Washington's direct words and hear his private thoughts as expressed in writing to and from various people. Absolutely. But we won't go to it. We don't go to it. So we reproduce what white scholars are saying, and they center their culture in the center of this and talk about how these things that we were just pawns in are beneficial to them, and we take it and run with it.
Absolutely. So I was going to say, so Dr. Wright, so he sent 9 students over there to work there, and so they just worked there for a period of time and then went back to Tuskegee.
There. They all die from diseases related to the environment and being there. They're not acclimated, and the last and surviving graduate, who is the most progressive, he is able to finish working with the German colonial regime. And you see the letters. There are letters from the graduates going back and forth to Tuskegee and Washington about the conditions there. And they're sharply criticizing it because these African people who come from Tuskegee, who are experts in agriculture, are not down with the nonsense going on there. The Germans look to reproduce a Southern plantation life. That was their desire. They're not aware of that. They get there, they see that, and they're like, no, we're out of here. They all die. And the last one, he does manage in Togo to go into the community and establish a school, an agricultural school, and an industrial school there. And then he dies crossing a river.
But Dr. Wright, why did Booker T send them in the first place?
This is the thing. You have to understand the context. The story of the Negro answers a lot of this to begin with, right?
Okay.
He is eager to put Tuskegee in Africa. He wants to share what is the ingenuity and the methods of Tuskegee with Africa. He knows not how to get there. It's just like, think about anybody who's going on their first trip to Africa. How am I gonna get there? What's the particulars? Somebody writes you and they're like, hey, we need several agriculturalists in Africa. So I sharply criticize Washington. However, this is not the scope. This happens in 1900. It is over within the first 10 years, less than that, really, somewhere around 1905 and 1906. This is a done deal, and Tuskegee's out of there. He's very clear. The desire is not to colonize. First of all, what do we look like colonizing anybody? But the point is that Tuskegee is not colonizing the Togo, not even in a position to colonize the Togo. Second of all, these former students are graduates, and they're only experts in agriculture, and they are basically crossbreeding cotton. This, of course, is problematic because it will all be to the credit of the colonial regime, the German colonial regime. That being said, clarity has to be given on the issue, and Washington makes it clear. When a white American venture capitalist who's stationed in the Sudan writes Washington and says, hey, I'm interested in colonizing the Negro in Sudan, Washington sharply responds to him that I am not interested in colonizing the Negro anywhere.
Come on.
And so when I talk about the transformation of Booker T. Washington, yes, he hit rock bottom. He was overzealous, uninformed, and ignorant to the understanding and the circumstances of the German colonial regime. He learns the hard way, okay? Period. You see him reposition himself. And the whole chapter 4 that I write in this book, 1 breaks down the Togo Expedition, okay? Zimmerman calls it Pan-Africanist. I do not. Anything that is to the benefit of any other people is not Pan-Africanist. I define Pan-Africanism in chapter 1 in the bare bones first Pan-African conference way, which is the unity of African people for the purpose of eradicating oppression and exploitation. Everywhere we are. That is the bare bones historical core definition of Pan-Africanism. If it does not, if we get together and it does not produce something that eradicates our oppression and exploitation, then it is not Pan-Africanist in nature. That is the objective. If we hold, as I tell people, we hold a house party, we come together, that's not Pan-Africanist because you from the Caribbean, this one's from the US and the other's from the continent. It's a house party. When you come together to address the condition of African people as those who are oppressed and exploited by white supremacy and culture, that is Pan-Africanist. And at the end of the day, you should be able to weigh and measure it. So what you weigh and measure as a result of the Liberian Crisis, and you have to read the book to get the details, it's too long, but the details are there. It's long, protracted, and very specific, rooted in the primary correspondence of Washington and all those people involved. What you get out of the Liberian crisis is the preservation of a nation. Period. one of only two African nations on the continent of Africa. The other is Ethiopia. Okay, no one else could have done that, period. It wasn't the best deal going, but it was the only deal, and it was the live to fight another day kind of deal that Washington fought for to preserve Liberia. You got to read the case. We don't got enough time. Two, the African exclusion measure. What did it do? It stopped U.S. legislators from closing the door for African and Black people to come into the United States forever. Washington was particularly concerned about all African people, but an affinity for Africans from the continent who had a steady stream of students coming from the continent to Tuskegee since 1893. He was seeking to preserve that. And of all the people that he would secure their right to continue to come into the United States, the only group that actually thanks him are his students from the continent of Africa. Not from the Caribbean, Central, South America, because he doesn't waste his time announcing that he defeated the measure, although he did. That being said, no Nkrumah, no Ezekwe, no Marcus Garvey, 4 months, 1 year, and 2 months after this measure is defeated. Do you understand? You can't come here. You are excluded based on being any person of the African or Black race. No Obama, for those of you who like him, because his daddy wouldn't have came from Kenya. It would not have been allowed. No beloved Malcolm, because his mother's whose ancestry comes from the Caribbean wouldn't have been in the United States to mother him. On and on and on. No Fela coming here to commune with African people here and go back and establish Afrobeat, okay, period. None of that. And no person who is in this country, the demographic in the United States, our communities, African communities, Black communities, would be totally different in the breakdown. No person who looked Black or was identifiably African and culturally African would have been allowed in the United States from 1915, January of 1915 on. Period. So that is the basis upon which, Washington is a Pan-Africanist. And it is a great story because one of the things that happens with him and African nationalists, and Professor Small talked about it a little bit, those details are all in my book. Anything that Washington did, good, bad, and indifferent related to Africa is in this book. Okay?
I got you.
In an expansive way. And this is the thing. It's interesting because nobody has wanted to touch the issue. You get what I'm saying?
No, absolutely.
The dirty work is done. Read the book. You get
Look, and family, I have the website, Booker T. Washington in Africa.com. Some people in the chat, Dr. Wright, they said they already ordered the book. They said they can't wait. Shout out to brother, I think it was brother OG. I'm looking for him right now in the chat. But a couple of people in the chat, they said they've already ordered the book. I told you, Doc, put up 20 of them for me.
Okay.
For the book club, just put up 20 for me because the Read Book Club will be checking out this book. Doc, you dropped a lot of bombs tonight. I mean, I learned so much.
We didn't get to Du Bois, but okay.
No, we look. That'll be our part two.
Yes,
that'll be our part two.
Promise, that's important too. That's
absolutely,
too.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about him. I want to talk about George Washington Carver because there's some stuff. People said that that Booker T. Washington treated him horribly when he got to Tuskegee. So it's rumors about that. I don't know whether it's true. I know you're the expert. I'm just telling you. I'm just telling you what
That's domestic, right? So right. I study him in an international context. That being said, I'm not an expert on Carver and Washington, but I do know I have some lay insight into that because I studied under a professor who was there when Carver was still there.
Got you. Okay. Yeah. Right. So I do definitely want to make this a part two. And I'm gonna be honest with you, Doc.
Mm-hmm.
Once we get off the live stream and it loads to YouTube, probably like tomorrow morning, I'm just gonna be sitting in my bed going back through this interview because it's so much information. You said so much, and it's like I just want to take my time get a notepad out. I'm going to read the book. You know,
Okay.
I'm gonna read the book. I only read the preface. The preface, but
Right.
I'm gonna read the actual book and just kind of just comb through this interview and take notes, because there was a lot of information that you shared, and I may not, like a lot of times with my interviews, like I tell my family when I'm in it,
Right.
I don't catch everything. So
Right.
I want to sit back and just, absorb the information as if I was somebody, just like an audience member,
Right.
and but anyway, Doc, hold on, let me drop this for you. Hold on, gotta drop a bomb for you. Oh my goodness. Doc, thank you so much. Doc, look, do you have
Thank
any
you.
any closing words for the listening audience? Any closing words for the listening audience?
Oh, there's so much I can say, but the point, the bottom line at the end of the day is that, so what you should get from this work is that Washington belonged to us. And I say this in the preface, you probably read this, that, you know, we should weigh and measure our leadership. We should do that based
Come
on
on.
how they serve us, okay? Not other people's interpretation. And so, we need to be able to do that, okay? And just a plug for Tuskegee, one of the things you see in the chapter 3 of the book, there was, of all HBCUs, one of the Tuskegee models when students were coming to the Institute is that leave your underwear at home, we make our own at Tuskegee. Because the idea that there was nothing that a man, woman, or child needed that we did not produce ourselves.
Ashe.
So that's the difference, okay? It's about sustainability and producing for yourself. That's the basis upon which we'll be free and independent in this world. And so that's really sort of what you should get from all of it, if I had to say anything.
No, Doc. I mean, that's what I got from it, and the people are giving you, the family's giving you flowers. Shout out to
Thank you.
Immortal Truth. I don't know if you can see the comments
No,
on the screen. You can't
I
see them.
never see the comments when I'm on these programs. And
Yeah,
it's good
yeah.
that I don't see the comments because then I'll get sidetracked.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. But Immortal Truth, he's been giving you your He said, "Oh my goodness," he said, "Beauty and
Thank you.
brains." He's been talking about you the whole
Oh, thank
time.
you.
He's like, "Oh my goodness," he said, "She's sharp,
There
she's
goes the comment.
intelligent." Yes,
Thank
he said, "I can't wait for part 2." He said, "This was so much information." Brother JB, he was posting like, what is, he wanted you to define Pan-Africanism. And he kept
So I
asking in the
gave it
chat,
to
like,
you.
define it. And then you just define what Pan-Africanism
Okay.
is. And so peace to brother JB, a beautiful mind. She said, truth. She said a lot of wisdom was shared tonight.
Thank you.
Thurman Meredith gave you fires and hundreds. And,
Thank you. Thank
yes,
you.
Gary Smith, his
That's my
brother.
alumni, Gary
Yeah,
Smith.
he said that. He said that he was a Tuskegee, alumnus. So
And he's a friend. He's my friend.
absolutely. So brother Gary Smith was in the building. Sister Marcia Pender, she said the interview was amazing.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank
And
you.
Marcus Sharp said he can't wait for part 2. And even Immortal Truth, and I agree with him. He said this book should be required reading for every high school and college. This should be
It should.
required reading. And family, guess what? Even if it's not this book, let's get this book in every Black household across America, family. Let's get this book in every household across America. Family, share this interview. Please share her website. I'm going to put it up one more time. All right, www.bookertwashington
Thank
and
you.
Africa.com, family. Let's get this book in every household. And I agree
Thank you.
100% with her that we need to tell the story. We need to tell our own story about, what did she say? The people who served us. Because
That's right.
that's what leaders, that's who leaders are, right? They are
Right.
servants of the people. And we can't allow
Absolutely.
other people to tell the story of our heroes and sheroes. So family, go right here to Booker T. Washington in Africa.com. Click on order the book. Okay, you could come right here, order the book. Literally, when I ordered it, I got my book within like a couple of days. Like it didn't take long at all. So you come here, order the book. The book is not available on Amazon. In fact, if you go to Amazon and you type in
it shows up, but it'll sold out.
Absolutely. It'll show up on Amazon and it'll say out of print, And so go to the website, grab the book, family. Or, look, check this out. I'm going to be, the book club, we're going to be reading this book. So we're going to finish reading and discussing The Color of Money tomorrow. And family, we'll take a vote. Maybe this will be the next book. All right. We can read this before we read the book, The Color of Law. All right. And so family, you can grab the book and read it along with the book club. And so Dr. Wright, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming on. And I really appreciate you and just applaud you for all of the work that you've done. I feel your passion. I feel your passion to tell the truth, to really just to set the record straight, to set the historical record straight. And I felt your passion. So I know this was supposed to be like a 1-hour interview.
I know we're like,
but when you started flowing and you were, you got into it, I couldn't stop. I was sitting here literally mesmerized listening to the information. I couldn't say, Doc. It was like, no, let's let her roll, And so, Doc, family, you all sat here and got a lecture. Look at what you got, because you are a professor at it's called CUNY.
University in New York.
But the acronym is CUNY, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and so this was like sitting in her college class, family. Now, Doc, when you teach, I know at Morgan our class periods are 1 hour and 50 minutes. Are your class periods 1 hour and 50 or?
Some of them are, depends, but right now we're like at 1 hour and 40 minutes.
Okay, yeah. We're typically an 1 hour and 50 minutes. So, family, you literally got a college lecture, from a professor of a university, family. So this was powerful, and again. Doc, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Doc, after I play my outro, I don't want you to disappear on me. I want you to stay tight, okay?
Okay, all right.
All right. And so, family, join me back here tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the Read Book Club. Again, we're discussing the last chapter of The Color of Money. And this chapter is powerful. If you have the books, if you don't have the book or you haven't read the chapter, still join. We're going to be talking about Barack Obama, his policies, Donald Trump, his policies and what they did and how all of this impacted Black folks. We'll be getting into the housing crisis. And so we're going all the way in tomorrow. So be sure to join me back here at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if I don't see you tomorrow, have a Black-tastic week. Peace, Black power, a BB to me. Bibi Fahodie.
Let's combat and fight back with maltracks. The war of the minds, they want control of the masses. And Common Core, they dumb us down in the classes. Without knowledge, we can't gain access. Build with the elders, take notes and write classics. We keep whining on the block, how it's gonna stop? Let's start supporting our own, make their supply drop. We buy stocks, then we buy blocks. Cause we know the truth and we tuned in to Dr. Maat.MSU.